This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
Well, just hours after the Alberta Budget released, we bring you this special episode of Real Talk as we dig into the details that matter most to you as citizens of our home province of Alberta. We welcome those of you joining us from outside Alberta as well. Guaranteed you'll glean interesting insights into what's happening right now in one of Canada's most dynamic provinces. Certainly a ton of economic activity in Alberta, a lot of economic potential as well. But that's not every storyline with the budget. Keep in mind, there's a relatively new government here, in particular, a relatively new premier that got to that position by making promises on things like income tax cuts. But guess what? That's not contained in this budget. We're going to ask Alberta's finance minister why when the Honorable Nate Horner joins us about 10 minutes into this episode. And in 30 seconds from now, we're going to welcome to studio the president and CEO of the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce, former Minister of Municipal Affairs, Doug Griffiths, and the CEO of the Edmonton Downtown Business Association, Puneeta McBryan. This episode of Real Talk is presented by Alberta's top real estate school, that's Relo, and we're going to be talking a lot about economics, the job market. We're going to be talking a lot about personal and industry potential today. If that sort of talk floats your boat, that's your jam, and you're ready to step into a career where you're your own boss, unlimited earning potential, setting your own hours, Relo is the perfect fit for you. That's R-E-L-O. The best part about Relo is how committed they are to your success. Live instructors hosting online exam prep sessions every weekend. You know, all you got to do is pass that exam, get your real estate license, and then you are off to the races. And these experts of theirs, they'll help you long after your course is completed. They are interested. They're invested in your success. And right now, because you heard about this on Real Talk, you can knock 20% off any Relo course with the code REALTALK. That's one word, Real Talk, when you get started today at Relo.ca. Puneeta McBryan, Doug Griffiths joining us in studio. Alberta's finance minister coming up in about 10 minutes' time. A good morning to the both of you and welcome. Thanks for making time for us.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Obviously paying close attention to the budget. There will be implications for both of you as corporate leaders and also as citizens of this province. Doug, what's one of the key storylines? Once you got all the details yesterday afternoon, you were able to sift through it. What jumped out at you?
Well, I guarantee you the headlines are going to be the $200 tax on electric vehicles.
Right.
It's the small things that get you every time, and that's the one that people are going to jump on and talk about how it's a slight against people who own electric vehicles.
Okay, I want to dig into that though, because maybe on the surface it's great headline material, but this may have been a long time coming. I know you've got some insights that.
Yeah, well, being in government before, we discussed it quite a bit because all of the revenue that comes from the gas tax goes to pay for the roads. And so if everyone moves to electric vehicles, you lose a significant amount of revenue. So we were always calculating what would be the equivalent tax we'd have to generate from electric vehicles in order to cover what we need for the roads. And I think we had calculated it around $120, $125. So it's today's dollars, it's about $200 per vehicle.
Okay, but of course it's being spun, especially for people that don't dig into the details or know the background or history on this, it's being spun as a slight. The Alberta government, a little shot across the bow at the electric vehicle industry.
Yeah, well, the government has sort of bred its own reputation for being opposed to electric vehicles and some of the innovative things, doubling down on oil and gas. So they sort of created their own storyline that's going to make this story get twisted. But there is some legitimacy to that.
Okay, I love that insight. This is just an example of the insights we're going to get on today's episode. Puneeta, great to see you. Obviously, forefront in your mind will be what this budget means for Edmonton, and in particular, Edmonton's downtown. What's one of the headlines in your mind? What jumped out at you?
Yeah, for me, it's all about our cities across the province. It's not just Edmonton and Calgary, but what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing is that there's really still a serious infrastructure deficit in our cities, and our downtown needs a lot of support right now. We're dealing with a lot of urban issues, and I think there's a lot of nervousness about how cities are going to solve these issues if the money's not there for them in this budget.
Yeah, we saw, and I'll reference this when we talk to the minister, but a release from Alberta municipalities that pulled no punches. They're basically choked. they're really choked at this budget. What are the implications of that? Help us understand.
Yeah, it's everything from, we've got sidewalks and roads that are crumbling downtown, and that's a really big deal. And so infrastructure usually is a partnership between orders of government. And I think the city of Edmonton, for sure, I'm sure cities across the province, were hoping for a lot more money to address these infrastructure issues. Property values are not what they once were, especially downtown. That's a huge chunk of Edmonton's tax base, and what I'm hearing from municipalities is that just that funding framework for cities is not working anymore, and we're expecting our cities to do more and more and more. I'm sure we're going to talk later about public safety and mental health and addictions and all these big issues that cities are trying to solve that are not supposed to be city issues to solve. So they're doing more and more, and there's not a lot of new money for them, or any new money for them, really, in this budget.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting. We can plot out this conversation, this episode of the show, to a certain degree, but we don't know what Minister Horner is going to tell us when we talk to him. And so a lot of that will be kind of us digging into his answers on the questions that the three of us will be asking. As mentioned, Doug, obviously a longtime MLA. You were with Progressive Conservative government, and obviously a senior cabinet minister for quite some time, including navigating Alberta through that horrific southern and central Alberta flood back in 2013 as Minister of Municipal Affairs. You've seen budgets and the process as a cabinet minister when Alberta's high on the hog, and you've seen times where that's not exactly the case, and there's some questions about Alberta's economic health. So take us into the process of putting a budget together, and you've obviously got unique insights on it.
Well, it is a difficult process because, we have a value here in Alberta generally to try and balance budgets. So you always try and work on a balanced budget. But the challenge we have with this province is that you can get $10-15 billion swings in revenue in a matter of a few months based on oil prices, which, signifies that the more we continue to rely on oil and gas, the more, wicked fluctuations we're going to have, and the less consistency we're going to have in our budget processes going forward. Which is, one of the values of the Heritage Savings Trust Fund, which I understand is why Minister Horner is putting more money into the Heritage Trust Fund. If it built up to $100 billion, I think that would unbalance Confederation. Imagine having neighbors looking at our bank account with $100 billion or $200 billion in it. That would create a lot of challenges, but somewhere we've got to move to more consistency. But it's been 40 years, and every government has tried to do it, and it's a continuous challenge.
Yeah. What do you think would be the implications? Like, just this is crystal ball. This is speculation. Take it for what it's worth. But when you say it would unbalance Confederation, what do you think actually would be the implications of that? What would our neighbors or fellow Canadians in Nova Scotia or Newfoundland or Saskatchewan, for that matter, make of it, and what could it mean for Alberta?
Well, it would every single program that the federal government offered, every time there was a First Minister's meeting where all the premiers got together, or the federal, provincial, territorial meetings, the conversation would always go to Alberta having hundreds of billions of dollars in the Heritage Saving Trust Fund and having lots of money, and it would distract from any constructive conversation about how we address issues province by province and across the country. Because everyone would look at us and go, you've got all the money, and yet you're making demands of the federal government or us. And I think it would actually make enemies of the other provinces because of the jealousy.
I talked to a few friends kind of in our nerdy circles on budget day. It's a big one, and everyone's like texting back and forth, and the group chats are going off. And the very first message in the very first group chat was from someone that just said, budget's bad for Edmonton. And I know that the city of Edmonton, when there's an NDP government in Alberta, which is no one's really gotten used to, there was one of them, but maybe a little more friendly for the capital city based on the way it votes, whether or not people like to acknowledge it. That's kind of how politics works. And the budget appears to be on the surface a little bit more friendly to Calgary. Is that something that you think Edmonton businesses, Edmontonians, people in steering Edmonton nonprofits just brace for, or do you think this was a surprise to anybody yesterday?
No, I think we were all bracing for it, and it's so tough. I always want to be an optimist. I always want to work with the government, whoever they are, there. And I've had great conversations with our provincial government about our economy and about downtown. I think I was maybe a little bit more optimistic than I should have been. I got my hopes a little too high, and it does sting, like, $330 million going to downtown Calgary for their new rivers and event centers, basically the new Calgary Arena. That hurts because, we've got big needs and an equal need to revitalize our downtown here in Edmonton. So it's hard to actually look at that in black and white, even though deep down we all kind of knew that we were not going to be in for an equal deal between Edmonton and Calgary this budget.
When you talk to politicians, some of them make the most out of geographic or other rivalries, perceived rivalries, invented rivalries, real rivalries. An example might be the provincial government in Alberta and the feds. You can make the argument it's good for both of them to be at odds, but also to figure out ways to work together. I remember Seamus O'Regan, federal minister, talking about how he actually had a great working relationship with then Energy Minister Sonia Savage, and it surprised everybody, but I think it was also a bit of a relief to know that some work was being done there.
Yes, we need more of that. And there is some of that. That's the fascinating thing, is it's like when we get down to certain issues, like we can collaborate between city to province to the federal government. But if you're, I guess too close to an election, in this case, we're maybe too close to a municipal election. And so politics gets in the way of just like fairness and getting stuff done, which hurts.
This government, I think, has just use this show as an example. Premier's made herself available several times. She'll be joining us to sit in the chair you're sitting in on Wednesday, the 13th of March. People can circle their calendars there. Minister Horner's going to join us in a second. The finance minister, they've been open with granting interview requests and the like. Whether or not people like what they hear in the interviews may be a different matter, but they're talking. The Kenney government didn't talk to a lot of talk show hosts, probably myself included, it's fair to say. Do you get the sense that openness, for example, to some media interviews, that willingness to meet with different people, which can be an Achilles heel situation as well, meeting with just anybody, but is that a positive sign, Doug? Do you get the sense that this government's willing to work with cities, work with organizations like the Edmonton Chamber?
I've got every indication about that. I mean, Minister Horner is coming for the Chamber breakfast, the post-budget speech. The Premier has been available whenever I've made a call to her office. I do believe that. I think they recognize, actually, that the state of the current legislature, the unbalance, means they need to put in a little more effort to still reach Edmontonians, because frankly, they're Alberta citizens, they're Alberta businesses, they're concerned about what happens with the province, and I don't think I've seen any example yet of them ignoring us. We might not get the same funding, which I think is a bit of a challenge, but they're listening, and so we need to keep talking and build that relationship so that eventually we can get that $330 million coming to our downtown, which will dramatically change the way Edmonton's perceived.
Okay, I'm looking forward to seeing which question the two of you put in front of the finance minister. That's coming up in just a moment here. We'll take a quick second to mention to those of you, maybe the younger members of our listening audience, but what's young these days anyway? It's never too late to start a new career, a new adventure in post-secondary learning. For those of you that are maybe looking at this budget going, well, what was in for universities there? What are the implications for the next generation of Alberta's skilled workforce, Alberta's innovators, Alberta's researchers? Athabasca University is right up your alley. You can learn more about Canada's open university with world-class accredited online degrees and courses by checking out the AU Advantage at athabascau.ca. Hey, it's the first of the month. If you're listening to this show on the day that we're doing it, that's March 1st. It means that groceries, every purchase over $75 are 15% off at the 16 Friesen Brothers locations across the province of Alberta. 15% off your groceries for the month. That's a big deal for families looking to stretch those dollars as far as they can. Friesen Brothers understands that wonderful things happen around the family dinner table, and that's why they do everything they can to make sure they're bringing you the freshest produce, proteins, baked goods, and otherwise as close to home as possible. Friesen Brothers is Alberta grown, Alberta owned. You can learn more at friesen.com. Are you one of those that's going to be investing in their personal space this year, where you're going to declutter? You've promised yourself you're going to get organized. You got to take a second to request a free consultation with California Closets online at californiaclosets.ca. We've worked with them. We've seen the finished product. Unbelievable. Masters of their craft. Their designers will give you ideas you've probably never even thought of. I mean, have you seen how they can make ironing boards disappear? Have you seen some of those walk-in closets they design? Have you ever seen them overhaul a garage garage. It's custom closets and storage solutions for the entire home, and nobody does it better than California Closets. And this is a shout out to the job seekers out there. If you're interested in being part of Canada's green energy movement, I want to let you know that Kubi Renewable Energy is hiring in Alberta and BC. They've got an office in Kamloops. They've got offices in Calgary, Edmonton. They've just opened one in Lethbridge. And those are just the headquarters. They're installing across Western Canada on farms, on big industrial buildings, on downtown office towers, and of course, on homes, cottages, and cabins. Homes, cottages, and cabins across Western Canada. Nobody's installing more solar than our friends at Kubi Renewable Energy. You can check out the careers link to learn more about what's happening at Kubi. And for those that are, we've caught your attention with the job seeker stuff, but you're not necessarily involved in solar installation right now. You're more looking at, you're a talented and skilled engineer. Guess what? More good news from partners of Real Talk. Apex Automation is looking for engineers, PNs, and even those that are just graduating right now to work out of their Alberta, BC, Saskatchewan, and Texas locations. Apex Automation is automating energy industry in Saskatchewan, Alberta, BC. You work in potash mining, you work in natural gas, or you working in traditional oil and gas pipelines. If you want to be part of where automation is going, you have to check out the careers link at apexautomation.ca. We're grateful to have Alberta's finance minister finding time to speak with us this morning on a special post-budget edition of Real Talk. The Honorable Nate Horner, welcome back to the show, and thanks for doing this.
Yeah, pleasure. Good to be with you.
Yeah, you bet. So Danielle Smith, obviously on the campaign trail, she wanted to be premier for a long time, and she knows what resonates with Albertans. Albertans like to see responsible spending and low taxes, and she promised that personal income tax relief that just isn't coming this budget. It's not coming in the next while. The cynics and the critics are saying it's not coming till an election year. So what do you say to them? Why not this year?
Well, I think if you saw budget 2024, you saw how small the surplus was. We need some time to create the fiscal capacity to bring it forward. We campaign on a few different things, one of them being balancing the budget, and it is part of our fiscal rules. The overall impact of the tax cut will be about $1.4 billion once it gets to 8% over the course of a full year. I'm very confident and committed that we will be able to implement the cut. Budget 2024 lays it out where we'll legislate in 2025. We'll move to a 9% $60,000 level in 2026 and the full 8% in 2027. If we had the room, I'd have done it this year, but 24 is our tightest year in this term.
I remember though, what Premier was saying on the campaign trail. She was saying these tax cuts are going to provide meaningful, timely tax relief to Albertans at a time when they need it most. I mean, I know it's not lost on you. It's not lost on anybody right now. The economics at an individual level, people are more stressed and strained now than they have been in a long time, maybe ever. You roll in inflation, the cost of borrowing, and everything else, and families are really struggling. So how does this budget help them now? A lot of people are going 2027's fine, but that's not helping me this Friday.
Well, I would like to remind all Albertans that the one big piece that we did do and happens every year now going forward is that we re-index the basic personal exemption, and that isn't small. That totals, I think, $980 million, almost $1 billion over the course of the year, which was personal income tax savings felt by all Albertans. So I think that's a great piece, coupled with the tax cut that is coming will certainly help. But like I said, the affordability challenges every Albertan's facing, the government's facing them too. And we're trying to move in lockstep and keep sustainable spending at the government level so we can continue to provide all of these tax advantages for Albertans today and tomorrow.
Alberta municipalities, among the groups, the advocacy groups that had released a statement yesterday, and if I had to pick a word, they're basically devastated by this budget. They say that it doesn't address in any meaningful fashion what they're calling a $30 to $40 billion infrastructure deficit. All of this under a new framework, and I know that when we talk to mayors and reeves, when we talk to councillors, they're really concerned about the future of the fiscal reality at the civic level. This budget doesn't do a lot for cities. How do you justify it?
Well, the local government fiscal framework, it does tie municipal funding to our revenues. So as our revenue line increases, so will what they receive, which I think makes for a great partnership. That was something that they asked for. Certainly, they would like more money. Everyone does. I'm aware of the needs. You have communities that are growing exceptionally fast. You have communities that have very old infrastructure, and with the cost of everything to replace, they're burning up, most of their funds on maybe redoing, one block of underground sewer and water lines. It's very real, and it's a challenge we're all facing together. When I met with the feds and Minister Freeland at our FPT meetings, there was a very consistent, uniform call from all of the provinces saying that if you're going to help us, if we're going to increase our population by 1.2 million people in a year in a country of 40 million, you're going to need to focus on the infrastructure dollars so that we can help all of our communities.
Yeah.
And that largely fell on deaf ears, but it's something we're very in tune with. A lot of our capital plan is focused on building infrastructure within those municipalities, and we increased it by $2 billion. So we're doing what we can.
Yeah, I mean, they note, and you acknowledge it, which I appreciate, forecasted population growth, which is a good news story, but we can't ignore the implications of it. They say existing roads, bridges, water, wastewater treatment facilities, energy infrastructure, schools, rec facilities, hospitals. When I say they, I'm talking about Alberta municipalities right now. And they point out that without relief or without a significant investment from your ministry and from the government of Alberta, this is going to be downloaded to property owners. I mean, this is basically forecasting significant rises, more significant rises in property taxes. Is that something that from the provincial level, you look to the municipal level and you say, well, that just might be part of the reality moving forward, higher property taxes in Alberta?
Well, there's only one taxpayer. Everybody knows that the different levels of government provide different services and have different avenues to create revenue to provide those services. So we're doing what we can to make sure that that's prioritized and spent in the right way. And, we're all in it together. I have municipal counselors that serve me back home and do a good job. I know the pressures that they're under, but we all have our challenges.
Minister Horner, I really appreciate this. Doug Griffiths here. Minister Horner, it's Doug Griffiths here from the Chamber of Commerce. I had a question for you. Now, Alberta's economic success depends on having that giant economic tiger between Edmonton and Calgary alive. I saw the funding for both municipalities are pretty equitable on the highlight sheet. But in the strategic plan, there's $330 million committed to Calgary over the next 5 years. I'm wondering, how do we get a commitment to Edmonton to help with our downtown, our reinvestment, our entertainment district, to make sure that both cities are alive and well?
I know that's something that is important to the Premier, and we've had a lot of conversations about that. I know when that pledge was made to Calgary, there was a determination that more had actually been spent in Edmonton leading up to that. So they thought that was actually maybe equalizing things a little bit. But all of that aside, I think the Premier does believe that there's more things that we can do to help Edmonton's downtown. We've tried to do that with the relocation of the homeless shelter and some of the other things we're doing with justice and public safety. But if there's an opportunity that makes sense, I think this government is looking forward to finding that with Edmonton.
Thanks so much, Minister. This is Puneeta McBryan. I'm the CEO of the Edmonton Downtown Business Association. I'm glad you touched on public safety. That is, of course, one of the top priorities for my members in downtown Edmonton. I know the same for my colleague in Calgary. A lot of what we've heard on the ground is that we are facing real constraints in the justice system and in public safety, and Crown prosecutors are overburdened, cases that should be heard are not getting heard, all that kind of stuff. So I think we were looking for more investment in those areas to account for really what we see on the ground as a public safety crisis in our cities. And so I'm just hoping that you could comment on what we can expect to see in terms of changes, knowing that there's not really a significant budget increase in those areas.
It's a great question, very real pressure. I'll tell a quick story. I know we had kind of a debrief from one of the major film studios after all of the filming action in Edmonton last year, and they said, we're from LA, and you got a real problem here. Like, we've never seen this kind of theft and crime amongst the vehicles and equipment that they were used to. And so that was kind of a striking comment. But I think that this budget does a lot. There's a lot of little pieces about digitizing and modernizing the court system. There's a focus around a special prosecution team to go after gang and organized crime, and a lot of other investments to try to make the system more efficient. The justice line item has increased a lot over our term. It's built up of a lot of labor, a lot of FTEs, and so it's one that we've seen a lot of growth in. But we're committed to making those investments and making the system work smoother and more efficiently. It's impacting every area of the province, so it's not lost on us.
Minister, I want to ask you about this $200 electric vehicles tax. Obviously, Doug opens with it today as one of the big headline grabbers, and it has been, right? I see some people tongue-in-cheek calling it the war on electric cars on Twitter. But maybe talk to us about the logic of that tax, what else maybe you considered, and your perspective on it moving forward. It does kind of send a bit of a message, it seems, but what do you want that message to be?
Well, I guess just that I don't think I think all Albertans are happy to pay their fair share. We spend far more on road maintenance, highway maintenance, infrastructure than we receive from the fuel tax. But I think notionally, it's something Albertans understand, that this goes towards highway maintenance, and so when we offered affordability and with fuel tax relief over the course of the last year, this is something that my office was flooded with, was why don't you have a charge for electric vehicles? And when we dug into it, I had realized Saskatchewan had done something in 2021. They're the only province in the country, but 44 U.S. states, including California, have done this or are moving towards doing it. So I think it's very defensible for those reasons I just laid out. How we achieved the $200 number, it equates very directly with what the average Albertan who drives the average amount, driving the average vehicle, would pay over the course of a year.
All right, good stuff. Minister, yeah, we've got 30 seconds left with you. I appreciate it. I want to ask you quickly about the Heritage Savings Trust Fund. Great point by a former cabinet minister on this show this morning, saying if Alberta had $100 billion, let alone $250 billion in the Heritage Savings Trust Fund, it could cause a disruption in the force, across Canada. It could put Alberta in the crosshairs to receive even less federal funding for things like, insert program here. Can you see that being a problem if this government makes good on the commitment that Premier's talking about?
Well, we're not getting our fair share anyways. I would start there, but I think it provide a lot of opportunity to this province. I know in speaking to the capital markets and trying to repair our credit rating, they love the fact that we have this fund. They see the value in it. And speaking with some firms that have done a lot of work with sovereign wealth, I think that's where we started doing this work to begin this vision that the Premier's been communicating. So we see a ton of value. They've taken $48 billion out of the fund since 1976 and used on operations and general revenue. The funds increased from $16 billion and change when we took office in 2019. It'll be at $25 billion after this deposit. So you're already seeing that kind of growth, and the commitment to leave the retained earnings in there makes the $250 billion or more target very realistic. And that will help if you see a future where our oil revenue is going to disappear or dissipate. That timeline matches very well, and then it gets to a place where you can pull real amounts off it every year annually, fill some of that gap. We certainly have a structural deficit without it.
As the Honourable Nate Horner, Alberta's Minister of Finance, and everybody wants to talk to you after the budget, so we appreciate these 10 minutes.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you got it.
Nice to see you, Doug.
Good to see you too.
So he makes the electric vehicle tax to me sounds reasonable. I mean, that sounds defensible to me. That's not a, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I said this morning, I think it's defensible. You've got to find a way to replace the revenue that you're losing as you move to more electric vehicles. So I think it is a defensible position. People might not like it, and they'll construe it as an attack on electric vehicles, but the vehicles use the road, and you've got to raise revenue to fix the roads.
Yeah. And like on the surface, it's just because it's funny. Like we have fun with some political storylines, and it just seems like they're targeting. And he says, well, Saskatchewan's already done it. Well, of course, Saskatchewan and Alberta are going to be the first to do it. But you know what he does as a veteran political communicator? He says, and so has California. And then everybody needs to shut up because if California is doing it, I mean, is there a jurisdiction in the world that's got tighter environmental standards? I don't know. I mean, I'm not the one to say.
No, I would say no. I'd say they're pretty
right.
tight.
California emissions are the real deal. If you buy cars in California, you know that. How did you feel about the answer that you got, Puneeta?
Yeah, again, I'm a chronic optimist, so maybe it's my Achilles heel. But I mean, there's a lot of changes in the strategic plan. Like, it might not be dollars, but there's a lot of things that it seems like this government's planning to do differently. There's some talk in the section on public safety and justice about using more restorative justice, mental health courts, drug treatment courts, like diverting people from incarceration, focusing more on mental health. There's actually like a surprising amount of funding for a lot of mental health initiatives, CASA Youth Mental Health, $7 million this year on Indigenous mental health and addiction services in communities that I think is new money, like therapeutic living units in corrections to help people with mental health who are incarcerated. So I don't know, again, like I maybe I'm being naive, but I actually feel like maybe with some of these strategic changes, the efficiencies he talked about, and then some of this diversion to mental health treatment, maybe we will actually start to see change on the ground.
I'm proud to be a CASA ambassador, and Bonnie Blakely, who's been the CEO there for I want to say about a year, ish, approximately, maybe a bit longer, has been like unabashedly bold in talking about they're absolutely intent on doubling and ultimately quadrupling the services that they're offering, but also like the horrific gut punch nature of that goal is that there's that need for youth mental health supports in the province.
Yeah.
Isn't it interesting? Like when you look at a budget, sorry to be Captain Obvious here for a second, but you can talk, if you talk, and by the way, I did put words in Alberta municipalities' mouths. I said, if I had to pick a word, I would say they were devastated. Why am I picking the word? They issued a release. Let me use their words. They didn't say devastated. They said extremely discouraged. The magnitude, though, of using extremely discouraged in a news release from a big organization like that is not lost on us.
No.
Right? So you've got the municipalities saying we've got these infrastructure deficits, and then you've got people talking about overworked nurses, understaffed healthcare professionals, schools that aren't being built, families that are busing their kids an hour and a half away. I mean, you could pick one, downtown crime. I mean, let's talk about that. The comparison that someone says, I'm from LA and Edmonton's got it bad. It's kind of like, well, okay. I mean, maybe they're from Malibu. I don't know. But like everyone can make a compelling case that their vested interest should be the top priority of the budget, right?
Yeah. You know what's interesting? This is a bit of a hot take. I don't know if I want to say this, but I'm already going down the road, so I'll say it. I think, when we talk about the Alberta advantage and we talk about being a competitive environment for business, taxes it's this old crutch, and it's for sure the way this government wants to position the Alberta advantage. We have a low corporate tax rate and we have no PST. But when you actually break it down for what matters to most growing startups and small and medium enterprises, which is the majority of our economy, the corporate tax rate only affects you if you're profitable, if you're highly profitable. So most of our, like if you think of our tech companies, our fastest growing businesses downtown, emerging industries, a lot of companies that are hiring a lot of people, they're not profitable, and they're probably not going to be profitable for a long time. So the corporate tax rate is irrelevant to them. That really only benefits the largest corporations. So when I talk to our downtown businesses and what makes Alberta compelling and attractive and what matters, it's quality of life. It's how good are our schools? How well funded are our schools? How clean and safe are our streets? How affordable is it to live here? Like those quality of life things that matter to Albertans, that matters more to business, in my opinion, than our tax rate.
What are your members telling you, Doug?
Well, our members, I mean, we've heard from some of them that hoped there would be an actual increase in the basic exemption on small businesses so that they would wind up paying less taxes. And of course, they drive 80% of our employment in this province. So if you want to have the biggest impact on businesses, I mean, the personal tax exemption rate is going to help, but that's a year or two out. But helping with small businesses, I mean, every small business that I've ever known, the second they have extra money, they put it into investing in stock or inventory, hiring new people, cleaning up the place, doing more because they're trying to grow their business. So, I mean, I think that would have the biggest impact on small businesses.
I want to take a look at our YouTube live chat here, and let me just drop in on this one here. Cassandra says, why are we not talking about the fact that there's zero in the budget for emergencies like fire, floods, drought, etc.? I don't know about that. I would say, actually, just because I know I'm referencing Alberta Municipalities Law right now. I just have their email in front of me. They say we're pleased to see the GOA taking threats of widespread drought and wildfires seriously by increasing funding for related initiatives. So that's from them. What were some of the other ones that might be off your radar? Like, let's say, like you're steering. So when you took the job as president and CEO of the Edmonton Chamber, you made this. I couldn't believe you did it. Actually, I was sitting there when you did it. You step up to a microphone. You say, "What was the amount of time you gave yourself for 1,000 meetings?"
200 days.
I was like, "What is he doing?"
And I finished them. I finished them on Tuesday.
You did. I know you did. I was like, "Ooh." But so you're talking to 1,000 people. What were some of the recurring themes that we haven't yet talked about?
Well, I think the biggest theme, which is part of the question that I asked to Minister Horner about the importance of Edmonton and helping the Alberta economy, being that equal balance to Calgary. We need equal weight on both sides. I mean, I always use the analogy of a barbell. If you put 50 pounds on one end and 5 pounds on the other, it's difficult to lift up. It's almost impossible. But if you have equal weight on each end, you can lift it. So Edmonton needs to step up to a new brand and a new reputation that makes it a world-class city, and stop running itself down. Stop assuming that it's not deserving of what we get. And I think we have potential over the next few years to change that story and change that dynamic, especially with funding from the provincial government. Because, I mean, in this cycle, it's only the first year of their mandate. This is the first budget. Everyone wants to see, in general, Albertans want to see a balanced budget, and they want to see lower taxes. The spending and the tax cuts tend to come in the third and the fourth year as you get to an election. And so some of that spending that Edmonton needs, I mean, I know we got the Winspear Center, we got McEwen Business School, we got the NAIT Advanced Skills Center. That's some good investments for downtown. I think the potential to get $330 million more over the next few years is high. And I think we need to rally as Edmontonians and as multiple organizations, and keep approaching this government and saying, look, we're important to you.
Yeah. Travis in the chat says, no money for municipalities, but like $300+ million to subsidize Calgary Flames ownership. What's up with that? Were you satisfied with the answer that you got from the finance minister on your question about the two? You know, I always feel bad when you say the two big cities and like Red Deer and Grand Prairie and all them are like, screw you guys, but you know let's say the two biggest cities. Were you satisfied with the answer?
Well, I'm satisfied that there's a door open to have some of that conversation. I think Minister Horner recognizes the value and the importance of Edmonton. I think this government does, and I actually, you know, we often have some concerns that we don't have sitting MLAs in their caucus to go have the conversation, but they're also sitting there thinking we don't have any sitting Edmontonian MLAs in our caucus, which may keep their ears perked up a bit listening to what we need. But that's why we need this business community, the DBA, the Downtown Recovery Coalition, the City of Edmonton, all of our post-secondary institutions, the Stollery, which I'm so glad got funded. For its development. I mean, we need to have one united voice about the value Edmonton provides to Alberta's economy. And I know every single municipality is challenged and frustrated. They need to reinvent their downtowns. They need investments. Edmonton is no different than the rest of them. But, you know, Edmonton and Calgary are two of the big reasons why people move to this province. And so we need to make sure that we have that economic powerhouse that's properly funded with the quality of life that Puneeta had mentioned about, because that is what drives a strong economy and will help keep Alberta robust attracting new young professionals, attracting new industry and businesses, because we need to be places that people want to live. That's what draws in investment, and that's the core of all of this.
The conversation is, you nailed it. Like, honestly, I would say like a quarter of the comments, or maybe a fifth of the comments, are about the EV tax. And really, if you look at it as a line item, well, whatever. It's relatively insignificant. It's a drop in the ocean.
The small things always make the headlines.
It's so true. And Blaine says road and highway maintenance in Alberta is a result of every other vehicle being a truck. It's not an issue with EVs. I don't know. Michael says it's not that the EV tax is a big deal. It's the reasoning behind it, equating EVs to weight. That just pits people against each other. I saw some people saying that this discourages folks from being part of the road to net zero. Shane says EVs, that tax should also fund the environmental damage of mining lithium and cobalt to make these EVs. I mean, a common protest or a common objection to EVs there, of course. Randy says bro trucks. What are bro trucks? Is that like 3/4 ton and up? I don't know. Is that dualies? I don't know. But bro trucks are heavier, he says, than EVs. Let's not get obsessed on weight here. Make every driver pay a fee at registration based on weight and kilometers driven. Picking on EVs because they don't purchase oil. Todd says this is just a poor way to implement a road tax. Says the gas tax works because it's a pay-for-use system. I like that point, Todd. He says the more you use, the more you pay. This punishes people who might want to use their EVs less. You know what? Another way of doing that is called tolls.
Toll roads, yeah.
Toll roads. Yeah. Are you allowed to talk about toll roads in Alberta? Are you allowed to? We didn't ask the minister about a PST because we knew what he would say. He would never acknowledge to considering it. Did the government, you were sat around that cabinet table, anybody ever float the idea of a PST?
Well, I did. I don't know, Maclean's magazine called me every 2 months for about a year just to see if I'd been shot after I talked about how, maybe we need to talk about a PST. I always found it ironic as a conservative that we tax people's paycheck. So you get the tax taken off before you ever get your paycheck, and we're okay with that. But when you spend the money, you don't want to be taxed on it. And yet a PST is shown to encourage people to save, to pay down debt, to look for tax credits, to do things like that. And so as a conservative, I always thought I'd rather have a lot less income tax and have a PST.
There's an interesting thing there too for the local economy that people forget. Like, a PST is great. Not having a PST is great for us as Albertans, as consumers. But I think of like Blues women's wear, iconic, long-standing downtown business. There is nothing discouraging me from an Albertan from going online and buying a dress from Amazon or, insert American retailer, because I'm not paying PST as a consumer. There's no competitive advantage for local businesses when it comes to getting consumers on the PST. So it's like, it makes life more affordable for Albertans, obviously, and it's like the cost of doing business is lower. But when it comes to spending and trying to support our local economy, no PST might be good for tourism, but it's not great for local business in other ways.
It's this gives me the inroad. I know that I'm about to say something federal, but Brian Mulroney, I mean, keep in mind, he was a conservative prime minister that introduced the GST. So it is possible as a conservative to introduce a tax, a sales tax, and rest in peace, Brian Mulroney, passing away just yesterday. If you're listening to this on the day we're doing it, passing away on the 29th, I believe, of February. At least that's when his family announced it. I was like, I recognized that he was prime minister when I was like just a wee lad. I was an elementary school kid, but there was always something about Brian Mulroney, something very compelling. I always really liked Brian Mulroney, and I know he's got his critics, and I don't know if you two saw the Globe and Mail called him one of Canada's most divisive prime ministers. They stepped on his grave yesterday. Basically, I thought it was brutal, but. Did you have? I know you're even a little bit younger than me, but did Brian Mulroney? Did he resonate with you in any way, Puneeta?
No, I am a lot younger than you, actually, Ryan. So no, but I obviously know who Brian Mulroney is, and then of course his son has ended up being a bit of a socialite in the Canadian landscape, and he is so likable. It's so true. Like, I don't have, when I think of the name Brian Mulroney and that brand, like, nothing really negative or divisive comes to mind at all. Like, it is just this fondness. Like, he's just sort of this face that's a big part of our history that I feel like a lot of people are feeling pretty pretty low today.
Some people give him credit for keeping Canada together. People celebrate what he did with, on apartheid on that file with Nelson Mandela before the United States or Britain were doing anything. And then he just had, like, as a broadcaster, that voice, man.
Like you have.
The voice. Doug, you're just barely older than me.
Oh, I think I'm a little bit.
See what I'm doing here?
Yeah.
But your take, I mean, you were a progressive conservative cabinet minister. He was obviously the leader of the federal party, the prime minister. He still owns the record. I know we don't talk about politics like sports, but through an election, 1984, the most seats of any Canadian prime minister in an election.
Yeah. You know what? I got to meet Brian Mulroney several times and talk to him. And what I always found was that he was an incredibly practical person. That's why he introduced the GST, because it wasn't ideological all the time with him. And I actually think, one of the challenges we have, not just in Canada, but around North America, is that conservatives have become more ideological and they feel like the world needs to fit into a certain mindset. And so you can't discuss PST. You can't discuss free trade. You can't discuss, because they fit into this ideology the way the world's supposed to work. But Brian Mulroney was the last great pragmatic conservative politician that really focused on building the country without saying, nope, that doesn't fit into my belief system. His mind was pretty open to pragmatic solutions to real world issues, and I always appreciated him for that. And I think that's actually what made him a little bit divisive, because that's where the ideology started to take over the Conservative Party and say, we believe this, because that's what split the Conservative Party. And then we got Chrétien for 10 years. And I think that's one of the challenges the Conservative parties across North America have right now, is that even to win the nomination, you have to be very ideological and hold to a very hardcore right-wing perspective, but then it makes it more challenging to win elections. We need more pragmatic politicians looking for real-world solutions instead of trying to satisfy an ideological base that refuses to have a discussion because they don't believe in something and they won't even discuss it.
Yeah.
I would say that's true across the political spectrum. Like, it's so true. We have lost that in politics at almost all levels of government. I think municipalities have maintained some level of political neutrality. We've managed to keep ideology out there for now, but I think
that's what scares me about political parties at the municipal level.
Exactly. That is terrifying to me, because I see what's happening at the provincial and federal level, and that kind of ideological decision making that does not necessarily go where the facts and pragmatism would take you. That's scary stuff.
Yeah.
Not everybody agrees in our live chat, which is weird. Usually everybody agrees on everything. But Jillian says, how did Brian, I know when you say certain things about Brian Mulroney, like some people are going to say, why are you talking about paper bags full of cash? Why aren't you talking about all the other stuff? So, but I'll acknowledge Jillian says, how did Brian Mulroney keep Canada together? Wouldn't the Meech Lake Accord would have appeased Quebec separatists and split the country up? Meantime, Wise Kyle says, Brian Mulroney was part of, here we go, the greatest trio of leaders, all capitalized, by the way, at the time, and maybe in history. Mulroney, Ronald Reagan, and Margaret Thatcher. So we know where Wise Kyle's coming from. He says they ran the 80s to be one of the best decades. For some people, for sure. Appreciate that from Wise Kyle. So enjoyed having the two of you in studio. And obviously, when you talk about a budget, you could get, in a province like this, 4.5 million different perspectives on it. But I want to make sure that we don't leave anything untouched or unaddressed or on the table as we kind of wrap this edition of our Real Talk Roundtable with Doug Griffiths, President, CEO of the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce, Puneeta McBryan, CEO of the Downtown Business Association. Anything we haven't touched on that you thought was significant or you'd like the audience to be thinking about or asking more questions about in the days and weeks to come?
Well, I would reinforce, because I think this is the most important part. This is the first year of this mandate, so it's the first budget. And I would say don't despair. There's a lot of hope and a lot of opportunity. Their revenues are going to increase significantly, as we saw from the next couple of years' prospects. I think it's a credible opportunity. They're going to be wanting to reinvest in this province. They're going to be looking for opportunities to invest in this city. They're going to be looking at opportunities to continue to decrease taxes while they make those strategic investments. So, I just think Edmontonians, Edmonton businesses, post-secondary institutions, the DBA, we all need to coordinate and strategize together to make sure that we stay front and center in the minds of this government. So over the next couple of years, they're ready to rubber stamp some of those strategic investments that will ensure Edmonton's economy, Edmonton's downtown, and Edmonton's quality of life continues to be exceptional.
Love it. I do want to mention that it feels like a ways from now, but it'll be here before you know it. The Edmonton Chamber of Commerce presenting the 2024 State of the City Address with Mayor Amarjeet Sohi. It's a must-attend event. You can learn more about it May 10th, 2024 by visiting edmontonchamber.com. Puneeta, how about you?
The one thing we didn't talk about is housing. It's obviously a hot topic in all of our cities. MLA Janice Irwin is all over this right now. She's got a private member's bill, I think that's what it's called, on rent control, which is very controversial. Lots of mixed opinions on whether that's an effective measure, but I can imagine that's probably very popular with a lot of voters who are renters. And so I think it's important that this government keep talking about housing. They're investing in this budget $70 million over the next 3 years into homeless shelters. Everyone that I talk to on the ground is adamant that shelters are not a solution to our housing problem by any stretch. And for us downtown, like if folks are in shelters overnight, that's great that they have a roof over their head if they go to the shelter, but where do they go all day? And how do we get them on a path to being housed and to, getting their life back on track in many cases? So I'm a bit concerned to see that the biggest investment on the homelessness and housing file is this $70 million over 3 years for shelters as far as new stuff. Because on the affordable housing, supportive housing side, there's still not a lot there from my understanding, especially not anything new.
Yeah, you wonder if it has. I mean, we see this trend. The Prime Minister was here, obviously, on the 21st of February, talking to us right before he made approximately, $190 million, something like that, an announcement into the city of Edmonton, an investment, I should say. They did something comparable-ish in Calgary. They're spending about $2 billion in British Columbia, and I know that the Federation of Canadian Municipalities has requested more direct cooperation and investment in projects with the feds and municipalities. And I wonder if maybe this is the province kind of acknowledging that. I mean, it's what it is like the critic would say they're passing the buck. That's what the critic would say. But if it's maybe an acknowledgement from the province that they're looking at this as something that the feds and municipalities are going to try to solve.
Yeah, I don't know about that. Like the housing announcement that the feds made here is going to be just barely enough for us to maintain maybe some level of affordability as our population balloons. Like that money is not going to make life more affordable for anyone. We're not going to create more affordable housing units for people who are living in poverty. Like that investment, I don't know. Like I think that's going to keep us at status quo maybe. But there's growing challenges, and I don't think it's enough.
I know that I've heard firsthand that a particular member of this government, provincial government, called the municipal councillor and said, "Hey, you guys should be spending your money on roads, not on housing. That's not your mandate." But the province didn't step up with the funding necessary for housing. So the city is stuck in a bit of a quandary that we need appropriate housing, and we need to improve our roads, and we need to invest in downtown. So it comes back to. And I was pleased to hear Minister Horner talk about as their revenues increase, their surpluses increase, more funding can go to municipalities. But they could also transfer that surplus to the Heritage Trust Fund and create no surplus. So I really hope the intent is there to provide increased funding to Alberta's municipalities because they desperately need it. And our economy is driven, not just by the province, but by the quality of the communities you live in. So I hope that funding increases.
I wish I could remember who said it because I think it was the comment of the day in our live chat. So I apologize to the Real Talker who it was that left this, but they said, as they're listening to us go back and forth, they said, "I'm confused. Are we rich or are we poor?" And I thought that's actually like, that's the budget summed up in one sentence. That's actually brilliant.
Yeah. Well,
are we rich or are we poor? I'm confused.
This budget still borrows some money and then uses money to pay out some other, right? And so it's kind of you're borrowing from one hand and spending on the other. And I know I've been in the budget process. I understand why they're doing it, and it's legitimate. It's not a game, but it's still a little bit confusing about whether or not we're really wealthy or we're falling on tough times. But that is the first year's budget every time. You say we don't have enough money. You balance the books. You store a little bit, and then when you get to the third and fourth year, you can start to do strategic investments, which is why I'm still hopeful.
Yeah. Okay. It's funny how that always aligns with election cycles.
Yeah.
It's weird how that works,
weird.
isn't it? Everything just in these perfect 4-year blocks. Huge thanks. By the way, do you see you see this green square here in our live chat? That's called the super chat. So that indicates to us that an audience member has actually donated money based on what they heard. And Ken just shot us $5. And he says, give me a cabinet full of Doug Griffiths, please. So there you go.
I'm not going back into politics.
You're not going back.
Sorry.
Hey, I think you found a good fit. What you're doing right now.
I did.
Doug Griffiths, President and CEO of the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce. Puneeta McBryan. It is like a delight every time we get to pick your brain, because I know that, like, obviously, you bring sort of like the chops to the table on understanding building Edmonton's downtown, getting business back, revitalizing that place. But it's also very evident that you give a damn about what you do, and I love it. So thanks for being here to break down this budget for us.
Thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
You got it. Puneeta, CEO of the Edmonton Downtown Business Association. And thanks to those of you that have been watching this, tuning in live on YouTube or on the Mixlr live streaming audio app presented by California Closets. Those of you listening later, send us your thoughts to talk@ryanjesperson.com. Email inbox, obviously open 24 hours a day, and that's exactly where we're going in 60 seconds for a Friday tradition we have called the Flamethrower. But first, I want to show something off for you. This, courtesy of our friends at Eden Landscaping. You can find them online at landscapeedmonton.ca. We talk a lot about what they can do. I'm talking to you a lot about timeline. If you want your project done in time for that Canada Day party, or maybe your 50th anniversary, maybe your son or daughter's graduating from high school, you're going to have people in that backyard. They're going to arrive through the front. You want your curb appeal to be top notch. Check out the work that Eden Landscaping can do, taking vision and bringing that vision to life. You got to check out their Greenland Garden Tour submission. This was a home in the Balmoral Heights neighborhood. They featured in this landscape installation over 100,000 pounds of boulders. How amazing is that? I love these rock gardens, these sort of more arid designs that are becoming more on trend, especially with more drought condition forecasted. Your landscape designer has to understand where things are going and how those trends are matching that. That's exactly what Mike and his team do. You can request a free conversation with them by checking out their website, landscapeedmonton.ca. And if you happen to be, heaven forbid, impacted by flood, maybe it's a burst pipe in the winter, maybe it's flooding through the spring rains or wildfire, let me tell you, Complete Care Restoration has more than 25 years of experience restoring property and rebuilding peace of mind. There's going to be a lot of stuff on your mind when disaster strikes. Entire communities impacted in many cases. We've seen it right here in Alberta and BC. The last thing you want to worry about is the commitment that your contractor has to getting you back to where you were, or even better. Complete Care Restoration does exactly that, approaching each project like it's their own. You can find them online at completecarerestoration.ca. The last episode of every week here on Real Talk, our friends at the Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park, that's Palisades, Nemeo, Newcastle, Westmount, Baseline Road, give us a chance to blow off a little steam. We invite you to bring us your hottest takes to ramp it up. These are all real emails from talk@ryanjesperson.com. That's where we're pulling these from. That's our inbox. It's the Flamethrower, presented by the DQs of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. And this one from Sue, who writes in, this is Sue's budget coverage. Sue says, I am flabbergasted that this government has canceled plans to build that new hospital in South Edmonton. Edmonton hasn't had a new hospital built since the Grey Nuns. We're talking the 1980s. It shouldn't have been a choice between the Stollery and the South Edmonton Hospital. We need both. And I know that they're trying to sell this as fiscal responsibility and saving for the future, but what it's really doing is stealing the future from Edmontonians and rural communities around. They'll fail to get proper and timely health care. What the government needs to do is collect an appropriate level of taxes, most especially corporate, says Sue, to ensure that we can build proper infrastructure. We could also maybe cancel that war room. Not really a thing anymore. Stop paying for advertising to convince Albertans of their terrible policies. Stop money trying to push that Alberta pension plan. Sue, you notice it's disappearing from the, she says, what about all this marketing to Eastern Canada? What about the Calgary Arena? What about shifting responsibility for orphan wells? I could go on and on, says Sue. How about you guys focus on health and education and stop focusing on political ideology? That from Sue. I love this one from Melvin, who says, guys, I love the show. I thought your interview with the Prime Minister was fantastic. I'm not a fan of the guy at all, but he was articulate and actually made some good points, says Melvin. The reason I'm reaching out is to say, are you ready for this? That Johnny was right, says Melvin. During that show, he says, it might be best, Ryan, to avoid calling Newfoundlanders Newfies.
I think I know this.
He says,
I've been
and I
told
did too.
this.
Now,
Yeah.
I want to be clear. If this is your first exposure to this controversy on Real Talk, I want to be clear. I was reading someone's comment, and ahead of reading the comment, I wondered aloud, am I allowed to say Newfie?
Yeah.
And you said, I don't think so.
My wife is half, and she tells me all the time. Some people like it, some people don't. Just avoid.
I think it's one of those things where, like, if you are a Newfoundlander, you can say it, and if you're not, you shouldn't.
Sure.
So Melvin says, I am a Newfoundlander who's lived in Alberta for quite a long time, and I've only ever heard the word used in a pejorative sense. Funny enough, though, he says, now that I'm in a more senior position in my field, nobody's using the word around me anymore. He says, now it's not the biggest issue on earth, but I figured it was worth reaching out. Have a great weekend. That from Melvin. Love it. Thank you. I appreciate that. I will no longer say the word we used to say about Newfoundlanders.
We're always learning.
Plus, Newfoundlander just rolls beautifully off the tongue anyway, doesn't it?
Right?
A shout out to all the Newfoundlanders that are now calling Alberta and Western Canada home. This one from G Money, who says, a public service here for you guys. After Jespo's Trudeau interview, I want to help your listeners understand something. Oh, thank you, G Money. Says, first of all, congrats on the interview. I thought it was stellar, Trudeau. However, the cracks are showing. The end is near. But I want to refocus my public service announcement here. He says, I've heard people on this show question Pierre Poilievre's rise and tactics. Now, hold my beers, says G Money, while I break this down for you. Canadians are fed up with Justin Trudeau and the Liberals. They feel like they're never going to get the Prime Minister in a one-on-one to say what they really want. Even if they catch him at an event, it comes out with so much anger and rage that it doesn't make sense. That's on them, not the PMG. Says Poilievre's able to get his uninterrupted time to tell Trudeau what Canada wants to say. And also, Ryan, on this gender, trans children issue, I'm convinced that the media class knows where Canadians stand on this, but they'll take their political, personal, and ideological beliefs and cast them upon Canadians. The polls have shown the majority of Canadians want parents notified about changes in their kids' behavior, pronouns, etc. The polls have never shown any wavering in support for Poilievre when he speaks on this matter, but the media is trying to dictate what Canadians and politicians can talk about. Is that democracy? G-Money says the tides have shifted. Canadians can speak openly and freely, agree and disagree on issues, whether it's gender or economics, and vote on them. And all that talk of what's important from a set of people who voted for Trudeau based on legalizing cannabis. Okay, that from G-Money. Number one, you shouldn't vote or leave up to democracy, things involving marginalized populations. I just want to address that. And number two, let you know we got a guest coming up in the next 2 weeks that's going to talk about a report he did for the Macdonald-Laurier Institute on where Canadians actually are on quote-unquote woke culture. Pardon me invoking the phrase. How about this one from Brian, who writes in and says, Jespo, I enjoyed your Black History Month Real Talk Roundtable, but as I listened to it, I have to be honest, I felt insulted. I'm a white guy, born and raised in Canada. I'm 65 years of age, says Brian. I've crossed paths with many people over the years from many different ethnicities and cultures. When I meet someone, I don't see color, I see character. And I resent being included in a general statement about whites being racist. I am not racist. To me, it felt like reverse racism against all the whites. Maybe your guests should rephrase their comments so that they don't come across as being racist against white people. Brian says, I've always felt when it comes to employment, government, the best person with the best qualifications should fill those positions. Now, I do realize not all people feel that, and there are real issues in this country, as well as the countries that your guests left to come to Canada. Sincerely, Brian, who signs off, peace and love. This one from kind of a highfalutin personality, Johnny. This is a tragedy. We're going to use his full name because he signs off with it. This is a flamethrower submission from Chris Flett, who's the business manager from IUOE Local 955. So we got a union leader writing in here. He says, Jespo, I appreciate the great discussions you have, the diverse viewpoints you foster. I love the show. However, he says in all caps, on my way back from Calgary, I was listening to a show featuring commentary from the Alberta Chambers of Commerce on a segment discussing Alberta's skilled talent shortage. I tuned in eagerly. This is an issue I deal with often as a labor leader in the construction trades, but I was alarmed at some proposals for solutions to the shortage made by the representation from the chambers. First, suggesting the fast tracking of foreign credentials as a remedy to the talent shortage is a bit rich, considering a major contributing factor to the current shortage is the skilled trades because industry stopped investing in Albertans years back by ending apprenticing when the economy tanked. Many local folks seeking a skilled trade at that time had no choice but to abandon the path because work completely dried up for apprentices, resulting in fewer Albertans getting trained, adding to the current scarcity. scarcity. We need to focus on creating opportunities for kids to learn and develop skills, not on talents from other jurisdictions. Plus, the suggestion of micro-credentialing. In the trades, for example, you'd carve us up into specific crafts, minuscule tasks only, like minor welds or pulling wire or pounding rebar. You would avert folks from obtaining a well-rounded journey person's ticket. That whole trades a la carte approach could harm the good work Alberta's doing to promote rewarding careers in the skilled trades. It would roadblock kids wanting to get into well-paying trades because they would transform into lower-paid, watered-down versions of what they once were. Tens of thousands of folks across the province are proud of their journey person's tickets and the skills they've obtained in Alberta. We need to expand and protect this learning, not chop it up to save wealthy employers a few bucks. What I'm saying, says Chris Flett, is let's invest in our youth and trades as a solution, not look for ways to help inflate the already bloated waistline of corporate interest. Okay, and this one, I've been looking forward to reading this one from AY, who writes in, earmuffs kids, and says, Jespo, can you shut the fuck up about Pierre Poilievre just once? Now, Real Talkers, this is Jespo speaking. This is not going where you think it's going. AY says, nobody cares what your opinion is on who you would vote for the next prime minister. Number one, I've never said that on the record, unless you're going to do your fucking job and cover the facts of what he's been saying and the sort of bullshit he's been spreading. You saying you think he should be the next prime minister, which I have never said, is totally and completely fucking useless bullshit, says AY, who spends more time writing angry emails than actually listening to what talk show hosts say. AY says, maybe if you stopped LARPing as a journalist and actually pulled your head out of your ass and looked at the information freely available, you would see that Danielle Smith, David Parker, Maxime Bernier are all peddling Russian propaganda. They have been since the anti-trans march last September. Fucking Reddit revealed that the vast majority of the online support for these grotesque ideas being astroturfed through false narratives and sock puppet inflation of engagement numbers. Try reconnecting with Rachel Gilmore or even looking at her reporting on the Conservatives and how they absolutely hate the hate that they're supporting. Your blind, biased support of Conservatives in Canada, this is unreal, right? Is exactly how Hockey Canada ended up with rapists and other fuckheads in charge of things. So not only does AY pin Pierre Poilievre's prime minister rise to power on me, but I'm responsible for the Hockey Canada scandal too. AY, thanks, but no thanks. You can send us your flamethrower. Fire it up anytime. That talk at ryanjesperson.com. It is proudly presented by the DQs of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. Big week coming up on the show next week. In the meantime, tell your friends to subscribe to Real Talk on the podcast, on YouTube. And of course, we'll see you back here Monday morning with Charles Adler.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jesperson. Executive producer Josh Dunford. Technical producer